Hey, YouTube. You have found the Honestly Alicia podcast. We are all about encouraging emotional health in followers of Jesus through stories and conversations that inspire and inform. Hey, Spotify users, did you know you can leave a comment when you're using the Spotify app? It's right under the pause button. So leave a comment, say hi. You can give me ideas of topics you'd like to hear more about or people you'd like me to interview. I'd love to hear from you. Welcome back. I'm excited about today's episode. It is an update on the guest of our most downloaded episode. 2 years ago, Andrew was here on the podcast and shared his heart-wrenching story of losing his wife to suicide while navigating life as a single father to his then 4-year-old son. So we're catching up to see how his journey of grief and recovery has evolved and how he's building a beautiful new chapter. You'll want to share this episode with anyone who might benefit from hearing Andrew's story of resilience and hope. Andrew shares his insights into how his healing process differs significantly from his son's, highlighting the delicate dance of what is his own grief versus his son's. We revisit one of my favorite metaphors, the pool of grief. We also discuss the home environment that Andrew and his current wife, Alexis, have intentionally created. It's one that fosters emotional awareness and healing. He shares practical strategies and insights into their approach. Also, we discuss the necessity sometimes of revisiting the past. Andrew offers a powerful perspective on why revisiting past trauma and life-altering circumstances is crucial for healthy forward movement. He also emphasizes the dangers of minimizing or ignoring these experiences and how, as we've talked about so many times, when we do that, lots of times those things come out sideways and they hurt the people we love. And as always, we've got a What is Happening segment where we lighten the mood with a funny story from Andrew's 7-year-old son, who is a cutie patootie. I'm so glad that you are joining us today for this deeply personal and inspiring conversation with Andrew. We hope his story offers comfort and hope to anyone who is navigating their own path of grief and recovery. And as always, if you or anyone that you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts or it feels like they are in crisis, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24 hours a day. It's 988. You can call or text. All right. Enjoy my conversation with Andrew.
Here we go.
I know. All right.
Hello.
Hello. We're doing it.
We are doing it.
So let's just jump in. So I'd love for you to share. Obviously, last time we talked was 2 years ago. Not talked, but last time we recorded. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to hear about your emotional and spiritual, you can break it down however you want or weave them together, journey since the last time we recorded. So in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I have to keep them separate just because they're very separate topics. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I learned was when we really did our last session, it was really kind of the front end of my recovery process, and some really good things were happening in my life. But that was just kind of the beginning of a lot of realizations, and my life was still not even really normalized again. It was just kind of almost the excitement phase of we're out of it, and I think you saw my optimism in that.
Yeah.
And you heard it. And I think that was a good thing, but I've kind of broken that down into a lot of, just different realizations that I've had over the last 2 years. I think one is grief is, and people say this all the time, but grief is not linear, and it certainly isn't. And I think it's interesting when you even look at like the typical grief cycle, you kind of weave in and out of that, and I know it's kind of person specific, and everyone's not going to go through it the same way, but it is interesting to me. Like you might hear certain phases of grief and what to expect, but I mean, it's really dependent on so many things. Like, what was your situation like? What recovery did you choose coming out of that? Were you really diligent in moving forward, or did you stay there? And it's just, there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So obviously my experience, and I think a lot of the emotional realizations I've had are specific, obviously to my situation, but there's been a lot. And we can kind of go into that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you want to tell, share whatever you want to share, as much or as little, about how you have then kind of processed as, like you're saying, I agree, right? You're only a year out from
Hmm.
Irina's death
Yeah.
when we recorded. And so, of course, like you said, you're at the front end. So the last 2 years, emotionally, what does the work looks like?
Yeah. Well, I think, and I can't say there's like a science behind what I'm about to say, but I feel that it's true. I know a lot of people kind of trivialize maybe the grief cycle, especially as it relates to like the denial phase. But I truly think that the denial phase is there for a reason, and it kind of, if you kind of choose to, last time I used the analogy of like being in the pool, which we're going to get into of grief, but
Yeah.
if you choose to stay there all the time, it's really hard to move forward. But I think when you move forward, you're kind of living in, and you're kind of creating a reality that's not really equating to actual reality. And I go back to all the time of like, that was really sad and that shouldn't have happened. And looking around, not many people go through that, so it's very easy to get into that like victim, this is unfair and whatever. I really strive to get out of that. I would go into it when necessary, but I would always have this like drive to get out of it.
Yeah.
um, and I think for me, when you're out of it, and you're kind of building this reality that doesn't equate to the sadness that it actually kind of is, I think
Mhm.
you're kind of living in denial in a way. But I think it's actually a very healthy thing. It allows you to build like a very stable, healthy environment. So when you do get into more the grieving cycle of diving back into it, you have a really safe place to do that. And that's kind of what I've really realized the last 2 years. Huge updates in my life, which we'll get into that too. But yeah, I think I've realized as life has normalized, I've really had to go back and put in a lot of work to be like, that actually hurt a lot more than maybe I initially admitted,
Well,
or
and
just the
whether,
abandonment of it.
yeah, I was going to say, not even like admitted, I almost feel like the situation is so horrific that
Hmm.
I don't know how any human can absorb it all at one time. And I wonder if it's just God's grace of allowing a certain amount of numbness and a certain amount of denial
Yeah.
so you could get up out of bed and parent Michael every day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's what I'm kind of speaking to. I think the denial phase is it's there for a reason,
Yeah.
and I think there's kind of a negative, kind of interpretation, I think, of the denial phase, but I think it's very important for when you're feeling good, you take advantage of that and you are really diligent on reconstructing your life, finding yourself again, and really pursuing that, because I feel like I was really good at doing that,
Yeah.
on the front end. But I think I started to realize the other part of it as I entered into the next phase. And it again, it wasn't linear. It wasn't like you're there, next step. It
Yeah.
was more like one day you're like, I feel incredibly depressed, and this is my life's really good, but you just start to feel it a little more. And I think you see certain triggers. And I certainly have experienced that in the last, honestly, 6 to 9 months,
Yeah. Isn't that
probably more
interesting?
than ever, um, which is kind of crazy because, mine was almost like reversed. It was very interesting, but I think looking back, I wouldn't have changed a thing because it really did allow me to take advantage of that kind of denial phase, but not in a negative way, not like staying there too long, but it allowed me to truly recover. And then when I was in a place where I had to re-enter into a lot of that grief cycle and that process, and I'm talking about like EMDR, counseling, really difficult discussions that you don't really want to get into if you're an overly optimistic person. But you choose to do it anyway, and
Yeah.
then you see the impact of that. So there's just been a lot of that in these last 2 years.
And I wonder too, well, here, real quick, I'm going to skip ahead and then we'll go
Yeah.
back to the next question. But would you just give an update? Because then I want to go back around to how you were in a place of safety. And I wonder if being in a place of emotional safety allowed you then to move through more grief.
Yeah.
So, yeah, give
Yeah.
us an update real quick
No,
on your
absolutely.
family.
Well, right around the last session, I mentioned I met a woman named Alexis. We're now married. She's adopted Michael. We have two dogs. I have a stepdaughter. We actually are expecting as well. So she's due in about September. We have a house. I mean, if you stand back and look at my life, no one would ever know that I went through something like that. And that's been weird too. And we can maybe revisit that. because that's been a really strange thing when no one can even tell what happened to you.
Right.
And
Because
yeah,
you're so young, they would just look at it and be like, how cool for you. Your life looks
oh,
fabulous.
it's the weirdest thing. When I say, yeah, my wife and I are expecting, they're like, oh, congrats. Yeah, parenting. That's a new thing. And you're like, you don't even know, but I'm not even, just never mind, you
Yeah,
know?
it's too much to open up.
Yeah, too much. But yeah, I started my own company shortly after all that happened. Trying to think what else. There's a lot there. I think the bigger picture is that I have a very normal life now, but the pressures of a normal life paired with my past, when they sometimes meet in a very aggressive way where you're not necessarily equipped to handle that. I mean that's where I've really seen the two worlds collide, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what do you think that there's an element as you, just so everyone knows, Alexis is wonderful
Hmm.
and just wonderful. And so, do you feel like as you were able to be in this healthy relationship with her and she's like a safe person with you, do you think that then it kind of in a way helped you be safe enough to move through the grief process?
Oh yeah, yeah. She, without a doubt, is the strongest, like most intelligent, like most emotionally aware person I've probably ever met, which is a great selection for a spouse, especially having gone through that. But yeah, she, I think it's sad, but I think a lot of people are intimidated by strong women. you know, I love that she's strong. I love that she can be kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
She has the ability to kind of call me out, and if she's like, you should put some work in, and there's like a line between spouse and counselor, and there's just a
Yeah.
very healthy environment of like, hey, like, I'm supportive of you, but I'll push you if you're in the pit too long, and I think that's a
Yeah.
really healthy thing. I think it's easy to find people in today's world where if you go there, they almost go in with you. And we talked about the pool of grief last time, but I hate staying there. But I actually realized in the last, year or so that I kind of would stay there.
Yeah, say more about the pool of grief, kind of where, last time we talked and recorded, you were able to stay out of it and felt like that's probably what you needed to do to be the best dad and to survive. And what you're saying, I feel like now is maybe to a degree, you got to get in it, swim around, do the work, and then get out. I mean, just tell me more
Yeah, yeah.
what you think.
When you asked me that question, I kind of had two realizations, to be honest. So I think at first, when we did our first session, I kind of used the analogy of one pool of grief, and Michael and I would go in there, and then I'd kind of take him out, but I didn't want to stay in there. But to be honest, a lot of my recovery at the beginning was really centered around Michael, and
Yeah.
not necessarily even myself. So I am a very overly optimistic person. I like to go forward. I don't like to be sad. I don't like to be depressed. And when I am feeling like that, I'm pretty good at finding triggers and things that are like considered self care where I can pop out of it pretty easily.
Yeah.
And that could be going on a hike, could be taking a nap, it could be having a really good workout, you name it. And I think what I've realized is that I really centered that grieving process around Michael, and I kind of disregarded myself in a way. And I think I did that very intentionally. I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, I want to make sure Michael's okay. I want to get him in a good spot. And there
Yeah.
were really two pools, and they were at different times. When Michael was kind of sad, I feel like I'd be very good at prompting him to like kind of get in the pool. We'd talk, and I feel like I was always very good at that. But there are really two processes, and I think that was the challenge of going through that with a 4-year old was you're grieving yourself, and you have to make sure that you're prioritizing your own mental health, but you're also managing the recovery of a 4-year old.
Right.
And those are very different. Like they don't occur at the same rate, so you have to be very, very emotionally in tune with not just yourself but your child. But yeah, I think what I've realized, and I think it again depends on the type of person you are. For me, I'm very optimistic. I don't like to be in the pool, so I'm pretty by default good at getting out of that. And I think some people prefer to stay in the pool, and they may be more difficult to get out. And I think both can have repercussions that
Yeah.
are very complicated. The latter, I think you stay in a sad state. Your recovery is slower. Um, you don't see as much joy in the world until a little bit later on, and that's if you even get out. I think some people have
Yeah.
a really big challenge with that. for me, it was almost like I'd get in, I'd be sad. And I think it was good. It'd be kind of laced in, but I'd be very quick to get out. And I think the last year, I really realized that I needed to put more time, in the pool. I need to take some more time and get in the pool, stay there. And I think that was through like EMDR counseling, really hard, just thought provoking time where I could sit there and say, did that hurt more than I admit? Did that feel abandoning? Did that feel, and a lot of the answers were yes, yes, yes. And you're like, man, I actually probably should stay in the pool a little bit longer than I thought I needed to. So
Yeah.
yeah, you kind of get it. I think that there's either a delayed effect of, maybe the grieving process, or there's a delayed effect of pursuing happiness again. And there's no right answer, and that's the complicated part about it.
Right, because everyone has to do the process. You can't stay completely out of the pool because then you're never going to go back and kind of tease apart and allow God to heal and work
Mhm.
through everything and process it. Or, like you said, if you stay in it and you only stay in it,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you're going to be a miserable person.
One, yeah, absolutely. And with Michael, I think a big fear of mine, and we can get into this too, but allowing him to grieve independent from me in his own way,
Yeah,
and trying not to force them to align because they just don't necessarily align and they probably never will.
yeah,
Um, but I think a big thing too, and when your son or daughter or whatever loses a parent at a young age, you want to protect them. That's kind of the default. Like you want to make sure they're okay, right? And that's a very fine line to walk. I think that there's a little bit of a range of like accepted decisions where you can say, hey, like I'm going to show you one picture, not 10, and there's a
right.
reason I'm going to do that because, yeah, I mean, it's a child, so for me, I think that there was a part of that where I could maybe take it too far and say, hey, like life's happy, look around, like look, but kind of forcing him to go back in and honestly more forcing me to say, hey, buddy, like, do you want to see a picture? And like, but it's hard because you want to avoid making your children feel abandoned, when in reality that's very abandoning. But just recently, I kind of re-entered into the phase of showing him pictures. It'd been a while, and whether that's right or wrong, I think it's very, again, situational and
Yeah,
what have you. But I mean, for me, it's hard because you recover your life. He has a adoptive mom, and I think with that, you want to respect that relationship. But I think over time, I realized that the reality of the situation is he did lose his biological mom, and he's going to have to grieve that at some point.
yeah,
So for me, I've kind of laced in that for him. Like he has a kind of a very cursory, maybe interpretation of what suicide is.
yeah.
And it's kind of beneficial because at a young age, you don't have even the ability to fully understand that topic. Um, but I also didn't want to wait till he was 18 to be like, hey, you're my,
By the way, yeah,
So it's been good, but it's just been a lot of realizations where I'm like, you know what? I'm actually really resistant to grief, but what if he isn't? Like what if he needs to go in the pool more than I do?
yeah.
And so I've really been more like prompting with him of asking him questions, and I can go into stories, or I have some good ones if you want to hear them. But yeah, there's just been a lot of that.
Yeah. What I'm thinking about is how similar that is to my kids that are adopted from
Yeah,
Haiti
yeah.
who
I'm sure
lost
there's
their
a ton of
first.
similarities there, especially with the
Yeah.
abandonment side and
Yes.
all of that. And
Right.
it's
And
you have to be
how,
diligent. It's
yeah,
yeah,
it's so tricky to know. I had one of those questions I wrote. It can be tricky to know when or how to talk about the birth parents. And it seems like there could be some similarities there. But I feel like just having open hands to it and saying, hey, if this is, do you, like you said, do you want to see a picture? And if he says no, okay,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
then, yeah, if you ever want to talk about mom, then mama or whatever, then yeah, do you delineate between what he calls Alexis?
Yeah, and that was the thing. I mean, again, it's
That's
my
so
situation is so
tricky.
unique. I mean, it's hard, but yeah, he calls Alexis Mama, Mommy, and
Yeah.
his stepsister, her name is Lainey. They use the same term for
Yeah.
Alexis, so that's been really good. He has like a sibling environment. I mean, family to him is our current reality.
Yeah.
So he actually calls Irina. He,
Oh, that
he
makes sense.
he
Yeah.
can really differentiate that, and I think honestly, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that um, there's a lot of decisions, and you can get in the weeds on why you do certain things. But for
Right.
me, I really based my decisions on how I'd handle that based on just my intuition. If it felt like not a good idea, I didn't do it. If it
Yeah.
felt like a good time, I would do it. And that requires you to be pretty in tune with emotions. And that's, something that some people are not very good at. But I think even if you're not good at it, you can put in work to get good at it or
Yes.
obtain those skills, whole nother
Yes.
conversation. Um, but yeah, I mean, for me, it was really the underlying intent for me was help him recover, help him feel loved, help him feel like he didn't lose 2 years of his childhood and the grieving process. I want him to go outside and play with an airplane in the yard, versus like seeing me always sad and depressed. And like, I want to do things that I have always done with him even before that happened. And I think once his life kind of normalized and he couldn't really tell a difference, and it was very confusing. You could tell
Yeah.
he knew something happened, but there's always room if you create that environment. I think that there's always room for you to go back in, and that underlying environment of love and support.
Right.
For me, Alexis has been huge there. Like I can talk to her, and we have a very good. We just have very good communication.
Yeah.
So if I go to her and say, "Hey, like I think Michael's misbehaving because he's struggling right now," so I think maybe I challenge you, just go give him a hug, like a big
Right.
one, and and I bet he'll snap out of it, and he does.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's a lot of it is like trying to build like a high rise without drawings, or like it's like trying to you're like orchestrating something that there's no guide to, and it's so
Yeah.
emotional. It's brutal, but it helps have a really supportive spouse. But I think that emphasizing that environment being in place is really really important for a child.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. Do you want to share? Yeah, share one story if you want. Like you were just talking about, maybe more about the pool, like where
Hmm.
I don't know, just any story that pops up about Michael or
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
So I hadn't shown Michael a picture of Irina in a long time,
Mhm.
kind of intentionally. And some people might look at that and be like, that's not very nice. But the challenge in my life is I have an amazing spouse now, an amazing mom to Michael that adopted him. And out of respect, you kind of want to support what's currently present in this world. And you kind of make decisions based on that. But I realized, and kind of going back into my recovery versus his recovery and things occurring at different times, we were sitting at the dinner table and Michael is talking to his sister Lainey. And we don't use terms like adoptive mom or
No.
stepsister. We're like, that's your sister, buddy.
Yeah.
And, that's your, and that's been a very good thing. So I think you have to be kind of aggressive with setting terms like that. But
Yeah.
he's talking to Lainey and he says, my first mama died,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
Lainey's like 3, and she's like, what? And she's just getting to the point where she can kind of wrap her head around it a little bit, because she, is kind of growing up and learning what our family dynamic even looks like and trying to comprehend what that even is. Um, but he was talking to Lainey and he said, you know, I'll show you a picture of her, maybe, and I'll show you a picture. And I was instantly kind of like, I don't want, and I'm eating dinner, and I had
I
kind of a
know.
hard work day, and I was
The
kind of like,
timing is always the worst. I've
oh
had
yeah,
a kid say to me, one of the kids, getting out of my car at school,
uh-huh.
something about their birth parent. And you're like, okay, have a good day.
Yeah, and there's no
Like,
closure to it. You're just like, bye. I mean, the good thing for me was we're at the dinner table, but I realized in that moment, maybe not right away, but I was like, not right now, buddy. Maybe later, And then later, Alexis actually said, like maybe it's time to show him and what was good for me is I kind of needed to hear from her.
yeah,
Hey, it's not intimidating to me. It's not threatening to me.
right. She can
And
handle it because
and
she's doing her
maybe,
own work.
yeah, yeah. And I also had a counselor, and I still go to counseling, but I even ran it by him, and he said something very important to me. He's like, are you preventing Michael from grieving? Like, what if, are you trying to control him? I know you don't like to be sad and you have your own thing there, but like, what if he kind of needs that? Like you can't control his grieving process. And I was like, 100% right.
Ugh,
So
why are you so wise?
yeah, but I kind of equated that to, I was just I'm on a different path than him, but I need to make sure that he's going into the pool if he kind of prompts it. And I think that those little indicators are like, all right, he's curious. He wants to see a picture. So about 2 weekends later, something like that, it was just Michael and I. Alexis and Lainey weren't there, and I had one picture. I selected one that was very happy. She was holding him, and he was probably like 2.5. And he's all happy, and she's happy, and it was like a family portrait or whatever. Just and it was a good selection. But I think for me, it was like, all right, I'm going to show you one picture, not 50. Because I want to control the environment, but I also want to use the time to like, hey, look at this, and I kind of want to like study him, like, what does this stir up in him? Does it make him sad? Does it make him cry? Does it? So it was really good. I essentially was like, hey, I wanted to ask you. I know a couple weeks ago you expressed like interest in seeing a picture of Irina. Do you want to see one? And he was like, yeah, I'll see one. And you could just tell he was like on the edge of his seat, which again sounds kind of cruel if you don't know the context, but for me, it felt like the perfect time. He was in a good mood. He had stability. And at that point, it was almost just like revisiting something in the past that it was a good time to do so. I show him a picture and he just gets a huge smile in his face. And he's like, that's her? And, that's me? And he was like, he was really happy and joyful.
Yeah.
And I started losing it because I felt, I actually kind of apologized to him. And I was like, do you ever feel like I don't show you pictures enough? Or do you ever feel like, we don't talk about it enough? And he was like, oh, no, Papa, no, it's fine. Like, no, you're fine. And I'm like starting to like bawl, and he's like,
he's probably like, it's good.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
And it was honestly one of the moments where he's out of the pool and I'm in the pool and I'm like, oh no.
Yeah.
And he's like, come on out.
Like, I got you, Dad. I got you.
Because he's 7 now. So just give you some context. But he's the most.
And he's very, very attuned.
Oh, yeah.
He's very aware.
But he looked at me and he was like, why are you crying? And I said, that just should have never happened. And it truly, buddy, it's really sad. But I was like, Mom and I love you. Like, Lainey loves you. Like, we have a really good life, but just, like, I am always here to talk to you, whenever. And then I asked him a question. I was like, what would you do if you saw Irina again? And he said, I'd run up and give her a big hug and tell her how much I missed her. And then he looked at me and he's like, I'm starting to tear up now. And I was like, oh my God. But it was just a brutal moment, but then he was like, can I see more pictures? And I said, let's wait a little bit. And I specifically planned to have one on my phone because I have a whole Google Drive, and that's where it's, you really have to figure out what's appropriate and what's not. And I do feel like there's a range. Like, is 1 appropriate? Yes. Is 10 appropriate? Maybe. Is 1,000 appropriate? I don't think so. Maybe at a later time, but it's really up to you.
When he's older.
It's up to you as the parent to determine what's appropriate, what's not. And then it's all the complexity of like, what's their personality, what's their stability, and it's a lot to analyze in little moments that are very important. But I think that if you're in tune with your emotions and your child's emotions, you can navigate that pretty easily. And sometimes what you plan on doing may not even be how it turns up. Maybe it does feel appropriate, but I think a lot of it's just driven on how you're interpreting in the moment, your emotions, their emotions, what feels right, but I can say after I've kind of started doing that, there's been good closure for him. And for me, I truly looked at it like almost damage control of like, I either protect the 2 years or 3 years between when he's 4 and 7. And I protect that and make sure that he has a very good childhood. And sometimes that means maybe making decisions that are kind of contradicting what people may think is a good idea. Which there's a lot of external pressure with it. And you have to be pretty confident with, this feels right, I'm doing it. We'll revisit whenever necessary, and then it's just, I could talk forever on it. It's a very complicated process, but that's what it's been. So.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. There's no one answer. And what's interesting, and I'm sure you'll experience it too with him, is like with my kids that are adopted, at 4, they have feelings about something. At 8, it's like they revisit the same thing, but revisit it with a totally different brain.
Yeah. Different perspectives.
At 13, they revisit the same stuff with a totally different brain. And then like Jacob's 18 and he can think about things now more abstractly and make more sense and own more of the story. And it's just very interesting to watch them almost go through it multiple times as different
Yeah.
people.
Well, and I think the big thing
Yeah.
there too as a parent is really instilling in them, the ability and kind of drive to pursue being happy, and you should pursue
Mhm.
your recovery in a way where, yeah, I don't know. It's just, you don't want to stay in the pool forever. You really don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you can share again as much or as little about like
Hmm.
spiritually? I feel like really traumatic events can rock
Yeah.
our foundation spiritually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm just curious kind of where that's been the last couple of years.
Yeah. I think, I mean, just speaking candidly, when I was going through all that, it was dark. I mean, there was stuff that happened that I wish I never went through. And you experience a really dark side of the world. And just
Yeah.
and you're living in it. It's in your household. So when you get out of it, um, I think you realize looking back. I mean, there's just this wild contrast. When you go through something like that, especially repeatedly, and then it just
Right.
ends, and then you're kind of out of it, but you have all this PTSD from all that. I think that there can be some anger toward God, like for
Yeah.
obvious reasons, because it feels like your life got flushed down the toilet.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, we were married for 9 years, so it's just like you feel like your life just got cut off, and it's like, and it's very
Yep.
confusing. But I would say for me, looking back, God, I think there's a lot of trust that I've gained and a lot of faith that I've gained just looking at how my life aligned with Alexis's and like the recovery. Like I really can't equate it to anything that I did. It was truly
Mhm.
God, like, and I,
Yeah.
I look at just the timing of her life and how my life, like we met and we experienced very different things, but very oddly similar. Like we're basically the same person. Like we interpret the world the same way. It's very easy to
Mhm.
communicate, and she's been so healing for me. And I just look back and I'm like, man, like, um, my life now is truly only where it is because of God. And I think that's hard when you're
Mhm.
going through it. It's confusing, and it's,
Yeah.
yeah. I just think that trust is a big thing that I've truly gained, and honestly, just being gracious with where my life was, where it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. Okay, so how do you, I know you've mentioned this, but I'm thinking more family. How do you support your own emotional, mental health? And then how do you do it kind of like with your family too? Because obviously you're blending a family. There's now adoptions, and then there's been loss, and some hard things on both sides. And so it feels like almost you have to be proactive. So what are the things that you do to be proactive about, I guess, making sure that you are all resilient?
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts kind of top down, like for me, well, and I think individually too, like if you're married, you're two individuals and you have to be in a good spot and you have to put in work independent from one another. And then you kind of meet in the middle, which is like marriage, and you have to challenge each other. You have to make sure that you have a healthy dynamic there to where, if I'm oblivious to something, maybe Alexis sees something, is freely communicating that to me, and we communicate through that. And that's a very critical thing. When I say top down, I think it starts with, you as a person, and then your marriage and how that
Yeah. Are you
aligns.
talking about the differentiating that you talked about this before, where it's not like an enmeshment? You are one person, she is one person, and two whole people come together
Yep.
to create like almost one other, like, whole
Yeah.
relationship.
And it truly is like an
But
environment you're establishing,
yeah.
and this is what's really crazy for me. I mean, my first marriage wasn't exactly healthy, I would say. Like we were very
Mhm.
different people, and I didn't really have that to rely on as far as like just that safe place to freely express yourself, even if it sounded crazy, even if it was very emotional.
Yeah.
And the other person can look at that and hear you, and they listen, they give you feedback, but it doesn't get unnecessarily like elevated emotionally. It's just very like, I can tell you're going through a hard time right now. And I love you, but I actually think maybe you should bring it up to your counselor, and you're like, I love you, and that's actually really good advice, but there's not really tension in our marriage. There's tension occasionally, but we're very good at communicating, whether it's figuring out what to do with Michael or trying to figure out, situations with Lainey. And I think a lot of that environment, again, it's a really top down thing. And I've seen that all along, even before Alexis was in the picture. Like, if I didn't take care of myself, I wouldn't be there for Michael. I couldn't be there for Michael. So
Yeah.
for me, it was, and just a little backstory. I've never done EMDR, never done counseling before this. Very, very new for me, but not necessarily awkward for me. I feel like I'm actually very, if you can't tell, like, I feel like pretty natural at expressing like emotions and
What?
so I think for me it was just though like pursuing it. I think when you're naturally good at it, sometimes you can actually be more resistant to being like, I need it, because I can just kind of think through my own emotions and walk through it. And in the past, I'm good at that.
Yeah, and my guess is like you're keeping it up
Mm-hmm.
here, and EMDR brings it. It's like almost a whole body.
Mm-hmm.
It accesses other parts of the brain, and it's more of a sensory experience. Yeah. It's not just I'm thinking it through and rationalizing, and then compartmentalize it, and we move on with our day.
Yeah.
Because the deeper traumas are stored in your body, not like in your prefrontal
I
cortex.
have realized that, and just a story about like EMDR. You set a safe place. You always come back to it, right? You go through like the traumatic event, you talk through it, you hold the buzzers. And for me, my safe place was Alexis next to me in church. My arm around her, and I just thought about like that is my safe place, literally. Like, but it was very interesting. Like every time I'd go through EMDR, I'd usually be in a good mood. If I went into it, I'd be like, I'm actually in a really good mood today, and it might be hard to make me cry. And it was very interesting. Like when I'd go into the grieving, and I'd be kind of prompted to go through like the hardest of the hardest moment, maybe when I found her or whatever. A lot of times I'd keep it together, but as soon as I'd go back to the safe place, I would lose it. And I think that contrast is really what gets me, so we go back to even like talking about like spiritually and all that. Just those contrasts, like going and having the darkest day of your life, and then suddenly, like, if I were to be back then and picture myself with Alexis in church with my arm around her, I'd be like, what? Like
it wouldn't even make sense.
It doesn't even make sense, but my life is that contrast. So a lot of times when I lose it emotionally, it's realizing all the work that I've put in, all the work that Alexis has put in. I think all of like God's work in my life, and really placing certain things in my life, and just the timing of it. And then you're suddenly, way ahead. I'm currently in my current reality, and I look back, and that contrast gets me every time.
Yeah. So I have a question that I already have my own opinions, obviously, because of Think About the Show that I'm doing. But what is your pitch, or what is your advertisement for people actually going back, doing their own work? Your situation is so extreme, but all of us carry around brokenness and traumas, whether they're huge, like what happened with you, or whether it's a lifetime, 1,000 paper cuts. What would you say to someone that is like, why would I even go back there? Why do I even want to open that up? Because I'm afraid it's going to consume me. And if I can just keep moving faster, or keep numbing, or keep whatever, performing, and just being a perfectionist, or whatever way they process it, why would someone want to do this work?
Yeah.
What's the benefit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Alicia, do you want me to reset it real quick to answer that?
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. It's annoying.
Okay, for people who have their own stuff, whether it is as traumatic, as intense, as sudden and difficult as yours was, maybe it's just a lifetime of the 1,000 paper cuts, what would you tell somebody that says, why would you ever go back there? Wouldn't it be best to just continue to move forward? What is the point of, let's say, EMDR and untangling and processing really difficult times in our lives?
It's a great question. I think that if you stuff down a lot of the traumatic events you go through, and whether that's one traumatic event when you're a child, or 10 or 1,000 paper cuts, or a traumatic like suicide event, I think it comes out in very subconscious ways, and you'll see little glimpses of the impact of stuffing that down. And I think it can come through anxiety, depression. It can come through uh, just being sad, which I think is a little different than depression. You could just be a kind of a shell of your otherwise would be self, And I think
Yeah.
that for me, and again, my experience really has, the context, or drives the context of this answer. But for me, it was really not being present. Like I noticed that I started to enter into the phase of, hey, I need to put in some work. And I didn't necessarily realize that at the time, but I started to see it really present itself or exhibit as anxiety, depression.
Yeah.
When life was so good and so normal, I started to realize
Yes.
I feel depressed. And I
Yeah.
think that you have to pay attention to that. Um, for me, that was a really big trigger to be like, all right, time to put in some work, and so I think that even if you're in denial, which it is, absolutely a form of denial, if you're like, hey, that really was a terrible thing that happened to me, I never want to visit that again, let's just move forward, it's impossible. Like you're gonna see the impact of it. And I think really dependent on what you went through, you're going to see it affect relationships.
Yeah.
You're going to get
100%.
quiet. You're not going to be in tune with your kids' emotions. And I think if you start the habit of just kind of ignoring things, you're going to actually probably damage others, especially when your kids are relying on you. So um,
Yeah.
in my house, I make it very in our house, I make it very default and very natural, like to express emotions, or at least I try to.
Mhm.
I'm not always perfect at
Yeah.
that. Um, but when you do that, I just think that it allows that environment of like emotional awareness. The other thing I was gonna say, um, I'm a big proponent of medication. um, I feel like there was kind of a stigma growing up that's not like you have God, or you have whatever. But
That's a whole nother
I
episode that
know,
I'm not sure I'm going to touch.
I
I talked to my cousin Jenny a couple episodes ago and
yeah,
we talked about anxiety and we touched for about 45 seconds on
yeah,
medicine
yeah,
and that sometimes we need the support.
yeah.
But yeah, it's a tricky thing in the Christian
It
culture.
is, yeah. But I can say for me, and we don't have to get into that too much. But for
Yeah.
me, it's like, all right, PTSD is a real thing. I have it. I still have it. You can put in the work. You can go to EMDR. You can go to counseling. It's a lot of work, and you will
Yeah.
see the impact of that positively. But depending on the type of person you are, and I think especially like emotional people are prone to depression,
Yeah.
sometimes you might need other assistance, not everybody, but
Right.
I actually in the last year said yes to that, to medication,
Yeah.
and it's been
Yeah.
life changing. It really has been. So I think, if you just pursue being the best version of yourself, and that
Right.
could be anything, it's EMDR counseling, it's hard conversations, it's going back in the
Yeah.
grief pool, it might be
Right.
medication. Yeah, it will result in good things, and you will see the impact of it.
It's like a mic drop right there.
Yeah, I hope
That's
so.
so
Yeah, I
good.
hope so.
Yeah. That's so good.
It's time for a segment called What is Happening?
Okay. Yeah. So do you have a good story? What is
Yeah,
happening?
a lot of them revolve around kids. If you have kids, my kids are really funny. But yeah, we were driving to school, just Michael and I think it was like last summer, and he was looking out the window, and there were some clouds. It wasn't like even stormy, but he was just like staring at the clouds, and I was just kind of like, he's kind of quiet, and then he randomly just asks me, he says, "Papa," and I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Do the clouds have to push really hard to get the lightning out?" And I was like, "What?"
You're like, oh my God.
And then this is the kind of kid he is now. And I was just like, he's a hoot. Yeah.
We were driving towards the mountains in Colorado. And it was when you come over a hill and it's the whole vista, like you see all of them. And Jacob was probably like that age, 6, 7 or something. Was God sweaty? And again, I'm like, what, buddy? Was God sweaty when he was done making the mountains?
Was he sweaty?
Sweaty. He was like, was God sweaty after he made the mountains because it was so much work?
That's so funny.
I was like, yeah, no, I don't know if he was
Michael is very like, sometimes he'll just sit, like there's this other time where I think I was like working in the yard with my shirt off or something. I was mowing the lawn or something.
Yeah.
And he looks at me, he's like, "What, are you trying to impress the girls?" And he was like,
"Yes, I can tell you."
And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, and I just got made fun of by like my 5-year-old son. I'm just mowing, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Because he's a mini you. That's why.
Yeah, I know. He serves it to me though. I'm like, "You're gonna get it."
Oh, just wait till he's in middle school.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's gonna be a good time.
He's gonna be a good time.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love you and just think you're the greatest. And
you too. Best band ever.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for spending your valuable time listening in. Honestly, Alicia.